There was a time when every American kitchen had one trusted name sitting quietly on the shelf: Betty Crocker. Her recipes weren't just instructions. They were traditions passed from one generation to the next. But somewhere along the way, many of those dishes vanished, forgotten, replaced, or simply left behind. Today, we're uncovering 10 of those lost recipes, meals that once filled dinner tables with warmth, comfort, and memories. Some may surprise you. Some may feel strangely familiar. And one of them might just bring back a taste you didn't even realize you missed. Long before fast food and frozen dinners took over American kitchens, there was a dish that quietly defined comfort in the 1950s: chicken divan. First popularized in elegant New York dining rooms, this creamy casserole quickly found its way into everyday homes through the pages of Betty Crocker cookbooks. It felt fancy, yet simple enough for a busy family evening. At its heart, chicken divan was a combination of tender chicken, fresh broccoli, and a rich, velvety sauce poured generously over the top. But what made it unforgettable was the way it was served, bubbling hot from the oven, with a golden layer of melted cheese and breadcrumbs forming a delicate crust. For many families, this wasn't just dinner. It was a small celebration at the table. The dish carried a quiet sense of pride. Serving something like chicken divan meant you cared. It meant you took the extra time to create something warm and nourishing, even on an ordinary night. And in an era where convenience was just beginning to rise, this recipe balanced both effort and ease in a way that felt almost perfect. But as decades passed, taste changed. Simpler, faster meals began replacing dishes like this. The careful layering, the baking time, the richness, it all started to feel like too much for modern life. And slowly, chicken divan faded from memory. Yet for those who remember it, the smell alone is enough to bring everything back. The laughter, the conversation, the feeling of home. In the years following World War II, American kitchens began to change in quiet but remarkable ways. New ingredients appeared on shelves, promising convenience, consistency, and a touch of modern magic. One of the most unusual creations to emerge from this era was the now-forgotten tomato aspic, a shimmering, savory gelatin dish that once held a proud place at dinner tables. Introduced to home cooks through trusted names like Betty Crocker, tomato aspic was unlike anything we expect from meals today. It combined tomato juice, vinegar, spices, and sometimes finely chopped vegetables, all suspended in a molded gelatin form. Served chilled, often sliced into neat portions, it carried a strange elegance that felt both refined and experimental. At a time when presentation mattered deeply, dishes like this reflected creativity and control. The molded shape, the glossy surface, the careful balance of flavors, it was food designed to impress. Families would bring it out during gatherings, placing it proudly at the center of the table, where it would catch the light and spark conversation. But not everyone loved it. The texture alone could be unsettling, especially for younger generations. And as tastes evolved, the idea of a cold, savory gelatin dish slowly lost its appeal. By the late 20th century, tomato aspic had nearly vanished from everyday cooking. Still, it remains a fascinating reminder of a time when experimentation defined the kitchen. For those who grew up with it, the memory is impossible to forget, an unusual dish that somehow captured the spirit of its era, even if it no longer fits into ours. In the middle of the 20th century, when convenience foods were beginning to reshape American kitchens, one dish rose quietly to fame: beef stroganoff. Though its roots traced back to Russia, it was through the pages of Betty Crocker cookbooks that this rich, creamy meal became a household favorite across the United States. The version many families remember was simple yet deeply satisfying. Tender strips of beef were cooked with onions, then folded into a smooth sauce made from sour cream and broth. Served over a bed of egg noodles, it created a meal that felt both hearty and refined. It was the kind of dish that could turn an ordinary evening into something a little more special. What made beef stroganoff stand out wasn't just its flavor, but the feeling it carried. There was a quiet sophistication to it, as if it brought a taste of something distant and elegant into everyday life. For families in the 1960s and 70s, it became a symbol of changing times, where tradition met modern convenience. But as years passed, even this beloved dish began to fade. Pre-packaged meals and quicker recipes started to replace it, stripping away the slow, careful cooking that once defined its charm. The richness that once felt comforting began to seem heavy, and the recipes slowly slipped out of regular rotation. Still, for those who remember it, beef stroganoff holds a lasting place in memory. The aroma of simmering sauce, the warmth of a full plate, and the quiet satisfaction of a meal made with care, it all lingers, waiting to be rediscovered once again. There was a time when desserts weren't just sweet, they were designed to surprise. One of the most curious examples to come out of mid-century kitchens was the pineapple upside-down cake, a dessert that felt almost magical the moment it was flipped onto the plate. Popularized through home cookbooks like those from Betty Crocker, it quickly became a centerpiece at family gatherings. At first glance, it seemed simple. A soft, buttery cake baked over a layer of caramelized pineapple rings and bright red cherries. But the real moment came after baking, when the pan was carefully turned over. What had been hidden at the bottom was suddenly revealed: glossy fruit, arranged in perfect circles, glistening under a rich, golden glaze. For many families, this wasn't just a dessert. It was an experience. Children would gather around, waiting for that single moment when the cake was flipped, unsure of how it would turn out. Sometimes it came out perfectly. Other times, it stuck slightly, adding a touch of imperfection that somehow made it even more memorable. The flavors were bold yet comforting, the sweetness of pineapple balanced by the deep caramel notes, all resting on a warm, tender cake. It was a dessert that felt both playful and elegant, fitting for celebrations or quiet evenings alike. Over time, however, its presence began to fade. Modern desserts became quicker, flashier, and often store-bought. The careful preparation and patience this cake required slowly fell out of favor. Yet the memory of that moment, the flip, the reveal, the anticipation, still lingers, waiting quietly to be experienced again. In a time when dinner tables were expected to impress as much as they were to satisfy, one dish stood out for its bold presentation and unexpected ingredients: ham and banana hollandaise. It may sound unusual today, but in the 1960s, this combination found its place in homes through the influence of Betty Crocker recipes. The idea was simple, yet surprising. Ripe bananas were wrapped in slices of savory ham, then baked gently until warmed through. Over the top, a rich hollandaise sauce was poured, adding a buttery, tangy finish that tied everything together. The result was a dish that blurred the line between sweet and savory in a way that felt adventurous for its time. For many families, serving something like this was a sign of creativity. It showed a willingness to try new combinations, to step outside traditional expectations, and to trust that something unexpected could still be delicious. Dinner wasn't just about routine, it was about discovery. Yet not everyone embraced it. The pairing of fruit and meat, combined with the richness of the sauce, could feel overwhelming. As tastes began to shift towards simpler, more familiar flavors, dishes like this slowly lost their place at the table. What once felt innovative began to seem strange. Still, it remains a fascinating snapshot of a different culinary era. A time when experimentation was encouraged, and recipes didn't always follow the rules we expect today. For those who remember it, ham and banana hollandaise is more than just a forgotten meal. It's a reminder of a period when kitchens were filled with curiosity, and every new dish carried the possibility of surprise. There was a time when a salad didn't just sit quietly on the side of the plate. It stood proudly at the center, shaped, chilled, and carefully prepared. One of the most iconic examples of this forgotten tradition was the perfection salad, a dish that gained widespread popularity through the trusted recipes of Betty Crocker. Despite its simple name, there was something almost artistic about it. Finely shredded cabbage, carrots, and sometimes green peppers were mixed into a lightly sweetened gelatin, then poured into molds and left to set. Once ready, it would be turned out onto a plate, holding its shape perfectly, often glistening under the light. At gatherings, this dish wasn't just served, it was displayed. Its clean edges and delicate texture gave it a sense of order and precision, reflecting a time when presentation mattered just as much as taste. For many families, making it required patience and care, turning an everyday ingredient into something that felt almost elegant. But as decades passed, the appeal of gelatin-based salads began to fade. The texture, once seen as refined, started to feel unusual. Newer recipes focused more on freshness and simplicity, leaving dishes like perfection salad behind. Even so, it holds a quiet place in culinary history. It represents a moment when creativity and structure came together in unexpected ways. A time when even a salad could feel like a centerpiece, carefully crafted and proudly shared. For those who remember it, the sight alone is enough to bring back memories. Tables set for gatherings, conversations drifting through the room, and a dish that, for a moment, truly lived up to its name. There was a time when even the simplest ingredients could be transformed into something that felt comforting and complete. One such dish was the tuna noodle casserole, a humble, filling meal that quietly became a staple in American homes. With guidance from trusted names like Betty Crocker, it found its way onto countless dinner tables throughout the mid-20th century. At its core, the recipe was built from pantry essentials. Canned tuna, egg noodles, and a creamy sauce, often made with condensed soup, were combined into a single dish and baked until warm and cohesive. A crisp topping, sometimes breadcrumbs or crushed crackers, added just enough texture to balance the softness beneath. But what made this dish truly memorable wasn't just its taste. It was the feeling of reliability it carried. Families could depend on it during busy weeks, tight budgets, or cold evenings when something warm was needed most. It wasn't flashy, and it didn't try to impress. Instead, it offered comfort in its simplest form. Children grew up recognizing its familiar smell drifting from the kitchen, while parents appreciated its ease and affordability. It was a meal that asked for very little, yet gave something meaningful in return, a sense of stability. As time passed, however, convenience began to look different. Pre-made meals and fast food options replaced the slow baking process, and dishes like tuna noodle casserole slowly slipped out of everyday use. Still, its memory remains strong. It stands as a reminder of a time when meals were built from what was available, and when even the most modest recipe could bring a family together around the table. There was a time when desserts didn't need to be extravagant to feel special. Sometimes, all it took was a simple mix, a warm oven, and a little imagination. One such creation was the impossible pie, a dessert that seemed almost mysterious in the way it formed itself. Popularized through the inventive recipes of Betty Crocker, it quickly became a favorite among home bakers looking for something both easy and surprising. What made this pie so unusual was its method. Everything eggs, sugar, milk, flour, and butter was blended together into a single batter and poured into a pie dish. There was no crust to roll out, no layers to assemble. Yet, as it baked, something unexpected happened. The mixture separated into distinct layers, forming its own crust, filling, and top. For many, this felt like a small kind of magic happening right inside the oven. It was the kind of recipe that didn't just produce a dessert, it created a moment of wonder. Families would wait to see if it worked, watching closely as it transformed from a simple mixture into something structured and complete. The taste was gentle and comforting, often resembling a custard with a lightly crisp base. It wasn't overly sweet or complicated, which made it perfect for everyday enjoyment rather than special occasions. Over time, however, even this clever dessert began to fade. As baking mixes and ready-made sweets became more common, the charm of watching something form from scratch lost its place. Still, for those who remember it, impossible pie remains exactly what its name suggests, a recipe that once felt quietly impossible, yet somehow always worked. During the 1950s and 60s, home kitchens were filled with innovative attempts to make meals both convenient and visually appealing. One recipe that perfectly captured this era was the molded jellied salad. Introduced to American households through cookbooks like those from Betty Crocker, it was a dish that combined bright colors, unusual textures, and a touch of creativity that seems almost forgotten today. These salads often included a mix of fruit, vegetables, or even seafood, all suspended in a flavored gelatin. Cherry red cubes, bright green peas, and pieces of pineapple or shrimp could all appear together, creating a mosaic-like dish that drew the eye before it ever touched the tongue. Families would spend time carefully layering or folding ingredients, taking pride in the end result. Presentation mattered as much as taste, and the finished dish was often a centerpiece at holiday dinners or social gatherings. For many, this dish carried a sense of excitement and wonder. Children would marvel at the wobbling shapes, while adults appreciated the patience and creativity involved in preparing it. It was a way to transform ordinary ingredients into something extraordinary, turning the act of eating into an event rather than a routine. Yet, as tastes evolved, gelatin-based dishes slowly lost favor. The texture, once admired for its novelty, became less appealing. Fresh salads and simpler sides took over, and recipes like the molded jellied salad were gradually pushed to the edges of memory. Even so, for those who grew up with it, the image of a perfectly set, colorful gelatin mold remains unforgettable. It's more than a dish. It's a glimpse into a time when kitchens were experimental and when even a simple meal could carry a sense of spectacle, delight, and nostalgia. By the mid-20th century, American home cooking had entered an era of experimentation where sweet and savory often collided in unexpected ways. One of the most unusual yet cherished recipes of this period was the pineapple cheese ring, a party appetizer that perfectly captured the bold creativity of the time. Recipes like this were championed by trusted guides such as Betty Crocker, ensuring it made its way into kitchens across the country. The pineapple cheese ring was deceptively simple but visually striking. Creamy, tangy cheese was mixed with crushed pineapple, sometimes softened with a bit of mayonnaise, and then shaped into a neat ring. Chopped nuts or maraschino cherries were often sprinkled on top, adding color and texture. It was served cold, often with crackers or crisp bread, making it a favorite for potlucks, holiday parties, and casual gatherings alike. For many, this dish was more than an appetizer. It was a symbol of hospitality and creativity. The combination of flavors, the cool texture, and the careful presentation all spoke to a time when entertaining at home was an art form. Serving this ring meant you were thoughtful, playful, and willing to embrace unusual combinations that delighted guests. Over time, however, the pineapple cheese ring fell out of favor. Changing tastes, a move towards simpler appetizers, and the rise of store-bought options pushed it off dinner tables. What was once seen as charming and inventive became quaint, relegated to old cookbooks and fading memories. Yet for those who remember it, the pineapple cheese ring is a delicious reminder of a bygone era. Its sweet and tangy notes, combined with the creamy richness, evoke not just flavor, but a sense of nostalgia. A time when home cooks could experiment freely, and every gathering carried the promise of surprise and delight. These 10 forgotten Betty Crocker recipes are more than just dishes. They're memories, moments, and flavors from a time when cooking was both creative and comforting. Each recipe tells a story of families gathering around the table, of small surprises that delighted and connected generations. While they may have faded from modern kitchens, their charm remains, waiting to be rediscovered. If you loved taking this journey into America's culinary past, don't forget to subscribe and join us on America's Lost Recipes. Together, we'll uncover more forgotten flavors and revive the tastes of history.